All right, we're going to talk some NFL and some Cowboys with Bobby Belt of the NFL Network. You can also hear Bobby on 105.3 The Fan occasionally. And, hey, he's now a big TV star, and that's why he's got the headphones and he's got the Callaway sponsorship. I mean, the minute you get that face on TV, all of a sudden everyone wants to throw money your way. I congrats on the Callaway sponsorship.
Thank you. I got to say, I had no idea that I was saying something or projecting something when I got this hat. I bought it out in Oxnard when I got roasted like a tomato on the first day and realized I needed some sort of protection. And so I went into the Target near training camp and got this hat, and then was asked about 10 times whether I golf or somebody made a golf reference to me. And I was like, guys, I don't know. I just got the hat because I needed covered. But then I ended out using Jeff Kavanaugh gave me a bucket hat. And so I ended up protecting myself with that. But yeah, I get comments about this all the time, and I forget. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is about golfing. I don't even realize it.
You can follow Bobby on Twitter at BobbyBeltTX. And Bobby, I don't know if you heard, but yesterday there was a deadline for some guy named Schmescott or something.
Who? What?
Yeah, didn't. I guess he didn't sign a contract. How close were the Cowboys and Dak truly to getting this done?
Logistically speaking, in terms of, the administrative steps that need to be taken, I don't think they were close at all. I think that they're probably closer in what they want, in theory and the end goal and the terms that they want to see than people think. But I think in terms of the actual, administrative steps necessary to get a negotiation done and get him signed long-term, I didn't feel like they were ever close. And this was something where the whole time I kept saying, it'll get done at some point. Last summer it was, it'll get done before training camp. It'll get done before the season. And it was just more an anticipation that eventually they would, reconcile and get it done. And, it just never came to fruition. And once he signed the tender, I know everybody said, you've got a couple weeks where you can still negotiate. I felt like him signing the tender was him saying, all right, we're going to just go forward and we'll pick this up again next spring. And so that's what they're going to end up having to do. So
Jane Slater, with whom you work really close, I think tweeted yesterday, and correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe Dak, last minute, was trying to push the deal through, and it was just too late. And you hear this person say this and that person say that, and Jane is probably as connected as anyone. So I take what she says and certainly what you say when it comes to the Cowboys is gospel. But what are some of the specifics that you're confident are true that are interesting as, a part of the last 24 hours of this negotiation?
I mean, I think Jane nailed it, that I think Dak probably reached out and, had contact with them, was trying to get something done, was trying to facilitate something, which maybe that's a failing on the part of Todd France. Maybe there's, some sort of disconnect between player and agent there. I really don't think so, though, because I think when you listen to what Dak has said, going back all the way to last year, whenever stuff gets asked, he said, I've got great representation. I hired them to do this. I don't even concern myself with that. I do think it shows a sense of urgency, though, that Dak has always taken that position, that he's going to leave it up to his representation. And then he was, talking to Steven leading up to the deadline. But, I think that overall, I expect it'll eventually get done next year. But, it's you risk hurting a lot of feelings, as we saw yesterday with Dak's brother, Tad Prescott, going off a little bit on the Cowboys and where things are. And, I think that it'd be a major mistake to let him go. I think that they realized pretty quickly that they had made a mistake. And I think Dak's side knows that and knows that negotiating power. But, there also is probably going to reach a point where Dak has to say, what do I want more? Do I want to be a Cowboy, or do I want to make X amount of money, on a contract? And so maybe if he has a great year, those two are able to mesh, and he's able to get the money he wants and be a Cowboy. But, I think there's going to have to be some give and take, whether it's, Dak on a certain number or the Cowboys on the number of years or what have you. But right now it's a game of chicken that to this point is, stalemate.
All right. So I'm a Dak defender. I know you are. I have bookmarked a blog you wrote. I think it was the 9 myths, debunking the 9 myths surrounding Dak Prescott. It's really well written, well articulated. And so I'm with you in that, I think it'd be a huge mistake if Dak wore another helmet. But let's just say next year, this time we're talking about Dak with an extension. What are the negatives behind not doing it now if they do eventually get it done? So you mentioned the possibility of hurt feelings, and I'll put that in the same category as maybe a locker room distraction of some kind. I guess they could have opened up some cap space for this year if they got an extension done. What are some of the other drawbacks? And I'm not phrasing this, well, what are they? I mean, no big deal. They just get it done next year. But I just want to make sure people understand what, by not doing it this year, even if they were to do it next year, what are some of the things that maybe are at stake or maybe are lost in waiting an extra year?
I mean, I think the biggest drawback in waiting an extra year is just, the market is always going to be driven up. I'd say whenever anybody, specifically take Dak critics, whenever I say, what do you think he should be paid, now? Then basically you increase that a little bit, and that's actually because the problem is that you look at somebody saying the Garoppolo deal was a worst case scenario, a lot of people thought. And a lot of people were saying, I wouldn't pay him $25 million. And then there were a lot of people that were going, well, he's good, but I wouldn't pay him 30. And as well, he's good, but I'm not going to pay him 35. It's like, okay, just logically follow the track you're going on and realize that whatever you don't think he should be paid, fast forward a year and a half, that's what you think he should be paid. And so it'll be a deal if you just get it done. And so I think that your biggest risk is just that market's always going up. And so you're eventually going to have to pay more money. But to the Cowboys, to play devil's advocate and go to the Cowboys side on that, they could say that, quarterback prices are inelastic. It does not matter how high the cost goes. People are always going to be willing to pay it. It's always going to look like a deal, and it's not going to matter in the end when we get it done. And so that the financially prudent thing to do would be to put it off as long as possible before getting it on the books. If it's always going to look like a deal, don't worry about putting it on until you absolutely have to. Get away with as cheap as possible leading up to as you can. I'm sure that's an argument that they make, and it's one that I think could make some sense and that you could argue. But at the end of the day, no matter what, whenever you sign it, the sooner you sign it, the cheaper it's going to be in the long run, always. And so I think that having them play out the tag, that's, a big chunk of money you didn't need to have hanging over you. If you wanted to go get a Jamal Adams or something else, an Amari Cooper midseason trade, if you thought that was something you needed. So that's a little bit of the biggest downside to me is just it's always going to be cheaper to get it done now. And I think that generally 2-3 years into a new deal, you can always get out of it, roughly. And it would probably take you 2 to 3 years to determine you don't want him and you're going to need to breed a new quarterback. So I don't see the sense in not getting it done now, but also that issue, like I said, with hurt feelings and potentially turning this into some sort of Kirk Cousins situation. That's a disaster scenario. But other than that, yeah, I mean, you could let him play it out, but I think the financially prudent thing to do is just go ahead and get it done, which they didn't do.
In what week do you think Dak is going to storm off the podium screaming to reporters, you like that?
You know what? That'd be great. I could see he's funny enough that, and he's sharp enough. I could see him doing that as a solid bit. I'll be honest. I just hope we get football this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's the biggest thing to me. And maybe that's another reason why the Cowboys didn't feel any sense of urgency is because, they're like, who knows if we're even going to get football this year. I don't think we're getting college football at all. I think college football doesn't happen. And that presents all sorts of bizarre questions for the spring and the draft and everything else. But for the NFL, I mean, we'll see. It's going to be interesting. If anybody, as one agent I was talking to the other day said, if anybody's going to plug forward and try and make it happen, it would be the NFL.
Yeah, they're like the old school fullback battering ram, just
exactly
through all. Yeah. All right. So you've brought up two separate routes. I want to address both of them. First, you mentioned Jamal Adams and the possibility of opening up cap space. So, another name that was floated out there was Jadeveon Clowney. And both of those guys, it would seem more palatable if you extended Dak and you opened up that space. And I know you can always manipulate. You can do things with Tank. You can do things with other guys. But by not extending Dak, what do you think that means for whatever potential moves there might be for the Cowboys between now and, we'll say, week 1?
Well, see, and that's I was talking to RJ Ochoa from Blogging the Boys recently, and he asked me, he said, what's the one contract extension you think is jeopardized by Dak's negotiations, where because you don't have Dak settled, you're jeopardizing another extension, or paying Dak potentially jeopardizes keeping somebody else. And, there's nobody really left. I mean, there's Michael Gallup, there's Leighton Vander Esch, but, I mean, you've got contingencies at receiver now, and you don't really know exactly what you have in Vander Esch after he regressed last year, and then he had the neck surgery. And so, to me, the biggest thing that you're risking by not getting a Dak deal done or not knowing where those finances are is exactly that, going and getting another piece. The Cowboys didn't anticipate that they were going to go get Amari Cooper and that was going to be something on their books for the next 5 years. But they ended up needing it, and they needed to go do it. Jamal Adams is the one guy I think they would do it for. I don't think Clowney's a guy they're going to go after. But I think Jamal Adams is somebody that they could be coaxed into. The biggest problem is that it's all new money, whatever Dak gets done, right? And so typically you can always have the smaller cap hit in the first year because you're extending onto a rookie deal. And so you're able to kind of shift some money around. Like, for instance, Patrick Mahomes is making like $2 million this year, I think. So when they shift bonus money onto there, that's a smaller cap hit than some other future years. But when it's all brand new money, it's really difficult to kind of free up any cap space, especially once you've got $31 million already on the books. Because a signing bonus of, $50 million, which you can divide by 5, so that's 10, because you can spread it over 5 years over the cap. That's $10 million, then whatever he's getting paid in his base salary that year. And it's much more difficult to manipulate that cap number once you're in a free agent deal as opposed to the last year of your rookie deal. And so that's another reason why it just would have made sense to do it earlier. You could have done things with the cap that are no longer accessible to you to manipulate. But I do think that Jamal Adams would be the one guy that I could see them feeling like, we need to go make this move. It's there for us, and we can go do this. And so that would be one area. I could also see they get into camp and maybe they're not happy with where their corners are at. With Byron Jones gone and Cheeto struggling a little bit, and Cheeto and Jordan Lewis entering the final years of their deals, Xavier Woods as well, then I could see them potentially going, we need to go out and get a veteran corner. And so maybe they just trade for somebody who's fallen out of favor somewhere. But that wouldn't, I don't think, be as impacted by Dak's deal as something like a Jamal Adams deal. But ultimately, I don't think any of it's likely. But Adams would be the one that I think they'd be the most interested in and potentially be affected by Dak's deal.
All right, so you mentioned the possibility of no season and maybe that influence the negotiations. I think, and I could be wrong if it's a record, but I think we're just off the top of my head, we're moving forward with more guys playing on the tag than in any previous season. There are a number of guys who did not reach an agreement. Is there anything that you can take away from that? Is there a reason why the money is such that this year, we're seeing more guys that, whether they're willing to play on the tag or an agreement couldn't be reached, that we're going to move forward with that being the case?
Yeah. I think there's just so much uncertainty about how revenue is going to be impacted and what the cap's going to look like next year. Whereas you can always just project some amount of growth all the way forward. I think that there's questions about what that number is going to be next year. And so I think that it makes some sense for Dak and the Cowboys to wait another year, and other guys in other situations to wait, to just go, okay, we know we're going to be here long term. Let's play out this tag so that next year we know exactly, even if the cap is reduced, we know exactly how we have to manipulate it. Because if we try and manipulate your contract in a certain way and then the cap drops significantly more than we were even projecting, then maybe we're in a bind and we have to cut guys because there's no amount of, cap gymnastics you can do to get it under. That happened early on in the existence of the salary cap. Teams would try and anticipate growth or project certain things, and their projections would be wrong. And they were not as adept as they are now. And they ended up having to cut guys to get under. That's what happened to the Broncos at the end of their run in the 90s. They had guys that they had thought they had structured properly, and then they didn't, and then they had to walk away from guys. That's how the Ravens broke up in the early 2000s when they had that incredible defense. And that's how Randall Cobb ended up in Dallas. It was essentially an accounting error from the Packers on their salary cap, and all of a sudden it was like, uh-oh, we don't have this money. And that was just for a guy that was, going to be $5 to $10 million, and that was how much they couldn't finagle. So I think that that's probably at play here a little bit, is that guys who do want to sign long-term deals where it's a tough negotiation, teams and representatives are looking at it and going, okay, well, let's wait till next spring when we have a better idea of where we are moving forward, and then we can know exactly how we need to manipulate this first year to make everything fit.
All right, Bobby. Last question for you. And I guess, there can be differences of opinion. I am personally, maybe you disagree. I think they did Zeke too early.
Yep.
Amari, I like Amari, but they're paying him a lot of money. You look at the past, it never seemed like there's ever a challenge with Romo or Witten getting their deals done, and we certainly didn't complain about that back then. But I don't know. I'm just, what are your thoughts? How would you evaluate the Cowboys negotiating and decision making when it comes to the financial side here over the last few years?
Well, I think for the Romo and Witten thing, I think those deals were never difficult to get done because you didn't have as many talented people around you that you felt you needed to get done. And so because of that, I don't think that there were nearly as many upcoming questions or guys that you needed to fit under. And so, yeah, you had no problem giving Romo what he wanted because, there was plenty of cap space. You weren't going to retain a bunch of guys. And I think the reason why the Cowboys don't have any questions now is actually because they've been poor at drafting in the last couple of years, so they don't have rookie deals coming up that need to get done. But I do think that I think the Zeke deal was done too early. You had 2 more years of control. I wouldn't have bothered getting it done. I would have let Pollard play. I would have called his bluff. I would have let him go into the season and see what he would have done. I understood why they got the Jalen deal done when they did. And it seemed wise at the time. I do not blame them for that. It doesn't seem as good anymore. But it's kind of like the Tyrone Crawford deal. I think everybody felt good about the Crawford deal when it happened. And then as it progressed, I went, okay, we were all wrong on that one. The Cooper deal I like. You can get out of the Cooper deal pretty easily. I don't think they're going to want to, though, because I think he's just so incredibly talented. And I know there's been a lot of people talking about pouting and things like that. He just flat out did not get along with Sanjay Lal. He and Sanjay Lal had major issues. There was a lot of contention there. I had one person tell me that Sanjay Lal frequently would demonize Amari Cooper to the rest of the group, and it made things tough for him. And it made it tough for him to engage when the guy that's overseeing it. You remember the Jets game where he had to leave after 3 plays, and everybody's like, well, what happened there? Why were, and he said, I didn't communicate well enough during the week how bad things were. And it was because there was just such a desire not to communicate with his direct position coach that, some communication breakdown occurred. And so I think that in the end, the fact that the Cowboys retained Amari Cooper and let Sanjay Lal walk when they had been so high on Sanjay Lal before, that spoke to the Cowboys looking at how that situation played out and said Amari Cooper was in the right here, Sanjay Lal was not. And so I think that Sanjay Lal was a particularly difficult fit for Amari, and I think that was a large reason for a lot of the checkout that you saw at times, or not even checkout, just I think it was difficult for Amari to play through that. I don't think he'd ever experienced somebody like that and he's dealt with some tough coaches like Nick Saban and John Gruden and guys like that. And so I think it was just so unique to him and so odd that played out the way it did, that I think it was just, it caused some issues. And so I think that's a big reason for some of the dip and play that you saw at times. And now that that's remedied and he's paid and he really communicated to people, like when he did to CA on the Fan, where he said, like, I want to be a Dallas Cowboy. I think about it all the time. And so I think that paying Amari Cooper was the right thing. I think paying Lyle Collins was the right thing. I question at times whether you should have paid DeMarcus Lawrence, not because he's not talented, but because I just don't know that you want that big a bite with something that I think there were ways to cobble together and with scheme changes that you could have matched some of that production. But yeah, I think the one they're really going to regret is the Ezekiel Elliott deal. And that's the one that I think is going to tie him up the most, where they're like, maybe shouldn't have done